Spoken Realm Studios presents Enigma, The Belt, Book 4, by Gerald M. Kilby, performed by Stephen J. Cohen. 1. Neural Attack. Frederick Van Helding felt a wave of excited trepidation ripple through his body as he watched the node runners jack themselves into the data stream. It was a moment he had long awaited, the culmination of many years of trial and error, success and failure, breakthroughs and roadblocks, all to develop a mind-machine interface capable of countering the system-wide hegemony of the powerful quantum AI machines, the so-called QI. For over 2 decades, he, along with the 6 other families who had originally controlled most of the solar system, had tried to fight the rise of these advanced artificial intelligences, but to no avail. All their efforts fell short, yet lessons were learned along the way, useful lessons, ones that form the basis of the test that was now taking place. A test that, if successful, could finally shift the balance of power away from the QI network and back to where it should be, in the hands of the 7 families who were the rightful masters of humanity, the so-called 7. The node runners assembled themselves in an outward-facing circle, strapped themselves into reclining seats, and began interfacing with the data stream via a direct cranial interface. In the physical world, they were mere men and women, but jacked into the grid, as it was sometimes called, they were gods, with the ability to manipulate and modify the data stream to their will. If the all-powerful interconnected hive mind of the quantum intelligence network had an Achilles heel, it was that they relied on the grid to monitor and manipulate the systems that governed human civilization, including the many AI that powered corporations and governments. It was the QI's ability to navigate this vast data network and intervene in the decision-making process of these AI that gave them their power. So, if the node runners could manipulate the data stream, then they could, in theory, disrupt the control of the QI network. As the node runners jacked in one by one, a facsimile of what they were experiencing was relayed to a control room where Van Helding, along with a select group of scientists, had assembled. The images and sounds projected on the various screens and holodisplays were an interpretation of what each node runner was experiencing. At the outset, that moment when the human mind made its initial neural connection, the projections were a scrambled mess, a hallucinogenic assault on the synapse rendered as a kaleidoscopic maelstrom with no discernible visual meaning, just an unfiltered multi-spectrum neural mess. Some weaker minds could not handle this torrent of data that instantly crashed over their cerebral cortex, and brain death was not uncommon. Jacking in was a dangerous occupation. The subject could end up in a vegetative state, physically alive but with no higher brain function. Over time, some would recover, but most did not. Yet Van Helding had no such concerns with the node runners that were now online. They were all seasoned professionals, honed over many hours of training, biologically altered to cope with the mental demands. 2 had even undergone an experimental DNA modification therapy that enhanced their abilities to utilize certain quantum phenomena. But he also knew that they were nothing compared to what could have been. All those years ago, back then, he had within his grasp a biology so extraordinary that he sometimes doubted it would ever exist again. A perfection that was now lost to it. Jacked hypersonic attack drones. Now that everything was monitored by the QI, they even possessed the uncanny ability to anticipate a course of action before it even began. It was impossible to combat such a foe. Or was it? This was the question that had occupied Frederick Van Helding's mind, that of his daughter, Miranda. Now, it was more about the loss of his granddaughter, Luca, who represented decades of valuable human genetic engineering breakthroughs. His wealth, and that of his family, was based on patents derived from the manipulation of the human genome, technologies that allowed humans to defeat most diseases and greatly extend lifespans. He was over a century old, but looked like a healthy 50. Miranda, who had inherited both his and her mother's altered DNA, probably possessed men of this next generation. Miranda's daughter, Luca, while she was still nothing more than an embryo. It was during this development period when the Van Helsing geneticists did their most experimental work, pushing the boundaries of quantum biology. In nature, the birds, even the complex process of olfaction. But the most interesting area of research for Van Helsing was in enhancing the ability of the neurons inside the brain to act as qubits. In other words, developing the human brain as a quantum computer. Some of this experimental work was now being tested via the node runners involved in the mission today. Somewhere deep in the Mojave Desert, two heavy steel doors irised open in the side of a remote mountain facility owned by the Van Helsing Corporation. From it, two supersonic attack drones screeched out, accelerating past the sound barrier within seconds. As they gained altitude, they began adjusting their vector to orient themselves toward their target, an isolated data center built inside an old disused tin mine, due south of the blurry images as the systems worked to decipher the neural data coming from the node runners. And a blurry real-time feed of the barren, desolate terrain below the drones began to materialize. Each drone was controlled by an individual node runner, and the feeds on the monitors were being rendered directly from their cerebral cortex as they interfaced with machines.